Hey you, and welcome. My name is Mike, and in this old video, we are going to Poland to look at the story of a missing student, to find out what exactly happened to Katarzyna. This is a weird one, and the investigation that unfolded not only led to one monster, it led to two. Both had like this disturbing obsession with skin, so yeah. Let's give it a go. On January 6th, 1999, a small tugboat called the Elk was sailing on the Vistula River. That small boat was captained by a guy named Mieczysław, and he was slowly guiding the boat up the Vistula River, which bisects the Polish city of Krakow. It was very dark as the boat slowly moved up the river, very quiet, and this was, in the depths of winter, so snow and ice were in the air. Captain Mieczysław and his small crew, they were all huddled up on this tiny little boat, wrapped up in scarves and hats. They were just looking to finish up for the night and get something warm in their belly. It was just after midnight, so after finishing up their duties along the river, the Elk and its crew began heading towards their docking station in the Zabocze district in Krakow. As the boat was approaching the dock, its engines slowing down, Captain Mieczysław heard this big thump coming from the rear of the boat. The boat actually lunged to one side, and Captain Mieczysław quickly was able to determine that their small boat must have hit something. Something got caught in the propeller, which wasn't entirely unusual on this river in the middle of this big city. There was lots of garbage bags and just plain shite floating in the river. He was thinking, it happened before, it'll happen again. So once the boat managed to dock in, Captain Mieczysław was thinking, it was after midnight. It was too dark, it was too cold, and they were too tired to have a look and see what had caught in the propeller. They were like, here, we'll check it in the morning. So the following morning at first light, which was quite late in early January, Captain Mieczysław, he drove over to the docks. He got out of his car and he was like, here, listen, better check what we caught last night, because that will damage it if we don't untangle it. So Captain Mieczysław and an engineer went down to where the propeller was, ready to reef out whatever was down there. Now, when they got there and they saw what was tangled up in the propeller of the boat, they were thinking this is pretty weird and pretty gross. It was like made of this weird material, almost like leather, but not as hard, and pale, grossly pale, like something that had been in the water for a long time. Captain Mieczysław had no idea what he was looking at, but as he was staring at it, he noticed something weird. There was like this lumpy part sticking out of it with a small hoop of metal attached to it. He stared at it for a few minutes before the horrifying realization came over him. It was an earring attached to an ear. He was looking at a lump of human skin. He immediately called the police, who rushed down to see this very disturbing sight. It was found to be the skin of a woman. Just the skin, no organs or anything like that. It had been sliced off and fashioned into a vest of some kind. The whole site was cleared out, and divers went down to the area of the river it had been found. And down there, they located a few more parts of a woman's body, bits of a buttock and a leg. They were found at the bottom of the river. As you can imagine, they were disturbed and baffled by what they had found, what they were looking at. Initially, one of the doctors from the Department of Forensic Medicine in Krakow, he thought maybe they had hit a woman who had been in the water the night before, and the propeller had degloved her, just ripped the skin off her, which is horrific. But no, it was determined that this skin had been cut off with surgical precision and sewed into a bodysuit. Immediately, the investigation began to find out who this woman was and what had happened to her, who had done this to her. The investigation was given a name, which I think if you were going through the case files and you saw it, it would make you stop. It was called skóra, which simply means skin. It was forensic technology, still in its early days in 1999, that was able to determine who this was. The identity of the victim was revealed to be one Katarzyna Zowada, a 23-year-old university student who had been living in eastern Krakow with her mother. Katarzyna went by Kasia, who was studying religion at Jagiellonian University. This was her third major, having previously tried out history, then psychology, and then her interest had switched to a higher power, and she was generally described by everybody who knew her as very nice, very pleasant, polite, but also weirdly secretive, shy, introverted. Mysterious was a word that kept on coming up again and again about her. She only had a handful of friends, she didn't go to many parties, and she had her own difficulties when her father had passed away 3 years previously in 1996. It was especially tragic for Kasia for 2 reasons. One, she was extremely close with her dad. And 2, they would go hiking out all the time. That was like, their father-daughter bonding time. He gave her a real love of the outdoors. But back in January of 1996, the 2 of them had been out hiking and her dad had slipped and fallen and he had broke his spine. He later passed away because of this, and this was something Kasia always blamed herself for because she was there. After that, she became extremely depressed as a result. Kasia, though, she loved the Grateful Dead, having become obsessed when a friend returned from the USA with a book for her, The Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test, a book that followed a group of LSD heads across America. As a result, Kasia was a frequent sight at record stores in Krakow's main market square, thumbing through albums. That is until November 12th, 1998, when Kasia vanished. That day, she'd been due to make her regular appointment with a psychiatrist, something she'd been seeing, ever since her dad died to help her deal with her depression. But she missed her appointment that day. As evening approached, Kasia's mother rightfully became worried. This wasn't at all like Kasia, very quiet, shy, introverted Kasia to go missing for a couple of hours. So then that evening, that November 12th evening, she went to the police to report her missing, but the police were, give it a few hours, she'll show up any minute now, Plus they were saying, Kasia's an adult, she's 23 years old, and you have no evidence something went wrong, so... And so weeks went by. The police did start eventually looking for her as a missing person, but they had no evidence of foul play, they had no clues, they had nothing to go on, so their hands were kind of tied when the investigation started up as to where she went. They went around, they asked her friends, they went to her local spots. Nothing. It was her mother who was out there, with the flyers, right? She hired her own private detectives to find Kasia, but she herself came up empty-handed. Nothing of Kasia was found, nothing. Until almost 2 months later, on a cold night in January, when a boat hit something in the river. This was like nothing the police had ever seen before, and not just in the city of Krakow, but across Europe. Even experts from the FBI were brought in, and they too were nonplussed about this case. From what they had, though, they were able to determine that Kasia had been kidnapped, or perhaps, lured somewhere, and then she had been tortured, she'd been beaten, she'd been drugged, and then it's believed the killer carefully sliced off her skin to make this bodysuit. And it's believed she was alive when the skinning began. Her arms and face weren't found, and her nipples had been removed also, which led the police to think that there was a sexual element to this entire crime. Then, after slicing off the skin, the killer had carefully sewed it back together, creating the suit. As you can imagine, Silence of the Lambs is what this case was called. Silence of the Lambs Poland edition. Criminal profilers were brought in, thinking that, and they made the same things as Silence of the Lambs. This is like Buffalo Bill from that movie, that the killer, there was a weird sexual element to this. The killer wanted to be a woman, and so he wanted their skin. He wanted this woman's skin to wear it. But other than what they gruesomely had, they had nothing else. No clues as to who had done this, and it was like determined that the skin had been in the river for weeks at this point. Kasia had stopped attending university in the weeks before she disappeared. Her mother didn't know, and her friends still met with her, but she began skipping classes, and she was seen hanging out in the main market square a lot, where she went to record stores, and there was bars there and everything. She was often seen just wandering around, doing her own thing, going for walks by herself, which is pretty common for her. It was also thought she may have begun working at the university she was studying at as a cleaner, but under a different name. Like when the investigation began and the police were going around with pictures in the university, cleaners recognized her. But they said her name was Angie, not Kasia, but that she did work here. Shortly before she disappeared, she had also dyed her hair black, had begun losing weight, and had changed her style of clothing, began dressing very, very differently to how she had been before. She also had begun taking trips outside of the city, but who she was meeting in the cottages and in the countryside outside of Krakow, nobody knew. Again, everybody described her as mysterious. She kept her business to herself and she did not have many friends. They did have a person of interest who was unnamed, a guy who lived outside the city, who had a habit of harassing women, watching them with binoculars, writing vulgar letters. He also liked buying and wearing women's underwear. And someone had also seen him visiting Kasia's grave numerous times. They would say they saw him going there all the time. He would go and leave a candle, and as soon as that candle burned out, it would be swiftly replaced by this person. Other witnesses said they saw him burying letters at her grave, but when the police went to look at these letters, they couldn't find them. But ultimately, other than being a bit of a creep, there was nothing to charge him with. That was it. Maybe she had been changing for someone else. She had quit university and was working as a cleaner to try and earn money. Maybe she was romantically involved with someone. That's why she had changed so much. And then this someone had done something pretty horrific to her. But regardless, the case of what happened to Kasia went cold very quickly. Now, before we continue, let me ask you this, hotshot. Do you ever get just gosh darn annoyed when you see on your bills or you get an email saying, "Thank you so much for renewing your subscription"? Great, thank you so much for renewing. Thing I meant to cancel 2 years ago. I'll cancel it later. I'm subscribed to so many different things and I've totally forgotten all my login details. It's a big deal to do that. But you know what would really be useful? An app that took care of all that for me. Because you know what? I'm just trying to save up a few pennies so I can buy more spooky pictures for my background, because you know I love my spooky pictures. Rocket Money is sponsoring this old video, and it is an all-in-one finance platform that helps you save and manage your finances. Rocket Money helps you save more and spend less by being the easiest place to manage all your subscriptions. Like that thing you signed up for literally once, and now years later it is still charging you. Be gone! It also helps you lower your bills, manage your budget, and grow your savings, all from one app. I'm not great with money because it's all like numbers and stuff, which is why Rocket Money is so incredibly helpful, because it's all from one really easy to use, clear language app. You can cancel your subscriptions with just one tap, or monitor your credit, or even have Rocket Money negotiate lowering your bills for you. Again, I'm so bad with money, I'm pretty sure I'm being ripped off by my electricity company. Or should I say I was. To save more and spend less, always a good idea with the economy doing whatever it's doing. It's like a magnet. How does it work? Join the 3.4 million members using Rocket Money today. And they get a hookup specially for you. Go to rocketmoney.com/chapter or click the link in the description to get started for free. You can unlock even more features with premium. That's rocketmoney.com/chapter to get started for free. Thank you so much to Rocket Money for sponsoring that chapter. Now let's go and make like a rocket and go. Then, 4 months later, in May of 1999, the forensics unit in Krakow were sent something very unusual. I think you could describe it as unusual. Yeah. The body of a dead man. Decapitated. Pretty unusual. They were also sent this guy's head, right? The severed head was there too. The head had been degloved. The face had been removed from the head. So they were thinking, send us to Krakow, maybe someone's making a set, right? You got the head, you got the body. See, an elderly man had called the police saying he had found his adult grown-up son strung up upside down in his basement like this. It was quickly determined that the dead guy's son had done this to him, leaving the body strung up in his grandfather's basement. Vladimir W. was 26 years old, originally from Russia, and had attended the same university Kasia did. In May of 1999, seemingly as an act of revenge against some slight his father did, he lured his father down to the basement and then tried to electrocute him, stun him with a stun gun. But when that didn't work, he whipped out a knife and he stabbed his own father to death. Then he hung his dad up, cut off his head, and removed the skin. He got the skin, he sewed it back up, and he left it in salt to try and preserve it. Then he began wearing his own father's face. This Vladimir W. put on his father's face, put on his father's jacket, put on his father's hat, then went to go meet his grandfather, who would eventually report all this. He met his grandfather at a bench in the middle of town. The grandfather did not realize that this was not his son, it was in fact his grandson wearing his son's face. See, the grandfather had really bad eyesight, so he couldn't really make him out, but he could just see what his face, yeah, face, and then the clothing he was wearing. They even went and had breakfast together while the son all the time wearing this like a balaclava, with the grandfather later remarking that he thought his son's voice was weird, it was softer than usual. The grandfather then later went to the basement, found his son still strung up. He called the police, and Vladimir was swiftly arrested and charged. Vladimir later said the murder of his dad was just an act of revenge for something. That's never been revealed, but the act of him wearing his own father's face and then going to meet his grandfather, that was an experiment, simply to see if he could pull it off. And he could. He also pulled off life in prison, and after 5 years he requested to be sent back to Russia, and he was. So eerily similar to what happened to Kasia, but it was later determined he had nothing to do with her death. They did go to attend the same college, the same university at the same time, but they never crossed paths. Ever. The motives were very different, but they did both like skin. Years would go by, and as technology advanced, they continued to test what they had. It was determined that Kasia had traces of vegetation on her body, vegetation that seemed to be from outside the city. She also appeared to have been beaten by someone trained in martial arts by the bruises on her skin. It wasn't until 2017, almost 20 years later, that a break was made in the case. A letter was sent in to the police. Now, its contents have never been revealed, but the person who wrote it said that their friend, 52-year-old Robert Janczewski, was Kasia's killer.
Dobry.
Z jakiej okazji panowie do mnie?
Chodzi nam o sprawę pani Katarzyny.
Jakiej Katarzyny? Nie znam. Nie znałem, nie znam, pierwsze słyszę, nic nie wiem.
Robert had an interesting life, and it was a case of ding 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 when it was all added up. Robert was living with his mother in 2017 in Krakow, the son of a poet who had left his mother for another woman. Growing up, his parents were very religious, and physical and emotional violence were common, and his parents frequently bet the ever-living shite out of young Robert Janczewski. He was involved with the police twice in the early 90s, both times actually he was the victim of assaults, which led him to pick up martial arts to defend himself. For work, he began in the Polish military, before he ended up in a morgue dissecting human corpses. And he also worked at the Krakow Zoology Institute, where he saw how animal skins were being prepared. He was later fired from his job at the Zoology Institute, when one day, he killed all the rabbits. For no reason whatsoever. When he was asked, he had no explanation for why he did that. So, he was weird around women. He would only date them if they A, wore French underwear, and B, were completely subservient and obedient to him. Oh, and I should mention, he was the guy who was harassing women and had visited Kasia's grave multiple times back in 1990. In fact, he was a suspect from the start. Even back then, neighbors of Robert said, it's probably him. He's a bit of an oddball, you know, a bit of a weirdo. The police just never had enough to go off of. Now they searched his home in a cottage outside of Krakow, right? And they found two things. One, blood in the bathroom, which even all these years later was determined to be Kasia's. And two, his diary, his good old little scribbler, so he was. He had a little diary where he detailed his stalking of women, but more importantly, what he did to Kasia. He was arrested, but denied killing her. Robert worked in the same market square Kasia often went to. She always hung out there, so that's likely where they met. And from what Kasia did, how she started losing weight, how she started changing how she dressed, she likely met Robert. He worked in a clothing store in that square, and it became romantic. She dyed her hair black because that was his preferred hair color. She was also losing weight. In Silence of the Lambs, Buffalo Bill has his victims lose weight so that he will have extra skin and it will be more pliable and easier to work with. Most likely the day she went missing, Robert went to where she lived in the city. He said, here, listen, come out, let's go out to my cottage outside the city. We'll have a nice, beautiful, romantic day. It'll be great. But instead, what he did when they got to the cottage is he lured her down to the basement where her screams could not be heard. He then tortured her, abused her, and skinned her, likely while she was still alive, though hopefully not conscious. He was an expert in skinning and the treatment of skin, so he knew what he was doing. He then tried to wear it, but she was a good bit smaller than him, so it simply just wasn't the right size. So he chucked it in the river, where it would be found in January. After her murder, He later became very religious. He went to church every day. He would sit in the front pew, became very involved in all that sort of stuff. And it's been reported at one point he confessed the murder to a monk. But this monk later died and took the secret of what he did to his grave. Robert, in prison, accused the guards of harassing him, claims later determined to be baseless, and lying to police was also added to his list of charges. He was later diagnosed as a schizophrenic. He was convicted of Kasia's murder and sentenced to life in prison. However, since his conviction, a few people came out and said they don't think he did it, namely because he was investigated back at the time and his place is searched, and nothing was found, but the search was maybe more thorough now. Now they had more to go on, and technology wasn't there at the time, but now it was. His mental illness also led people to not think he had done it. His psychiatrist didn't think he did it. In fact, more people have come out and said that the person who sent in the letter in 2017 naming Robert Janczewski as the killer, it's more likely he did it, that he is the real killer. Which is, I don't know what's more terrifying, that Robert did it and is as gruesome as we all think he is, or that the real killer is still out there. But I mean, Robert fits the psychological profile from being obsessed with women, so maybe that's why he was trying to wear their literal skin. He harassed women, he was vulgar to women. He was trained in martial arts, and whoever attacked Kasia, was beaten up with somebody who knew martial arts. He knew about skinning and skin and sewing and all of that. Plus, I mean, DNA was found in the house, so that's kind of like that clinker right there. The man who had sent in the tip about Robert Janczewski was a friend of Robert's from gardening and all stuff like that. They had met each other through that way. This guy, Lessig was his name, also worked in the main square, main market square in Krakow. He owned a reptile store in that square. He was also said to be an alcoholic, a sadist who enjoyed beating women, but more importantly, he had way more experience than Robert in skinning animals and treating their skin and all that sort of stuff. Apparently this guy's apartment was adorned with the skins of reptiles, like of snakes and other reptiles. They were everywhere. He would skin them, treat their skin, and hang it up everywhere. Maybe he would have fit in a woman's skin there too. He wanted to add to his collection. A woman claims to have seen Kasia at that guy's pet store, but I mean, how many sadists and animal skinning people are there in this place? It sounds like the defendants are kind of grasping at straws here, but, in the media, the police have not released much to the media, so who actually knows? But the body of Kasia has still never been found to this day. The only thing they ever found was what this case is called: skin. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you being here, watching this whole video with me. It means so much to me as always, so thanks a lot, and yeah. Here, listen, please check out the That Chapter podcast for more stories, and mostly all exclusive stories there now at this point, so please check that out. It's on all podcast platforms, and please check out the Patreon where you get early access to videos, and there's exclusive videos there too. But you know what? Till the next one, I'll see you then. Please, until then, look after each other, look after yourselves. Do it for me, because I love you. Mike out.